In 1996, Bill Gates said, "Content is king." And boy was he right. 3 decades later, it still occupies the throne. For lawyers, law firms, and companies serving the legal industry, content marketing and thought leadership marketing are a must if they want to build their books of business or increase their revenues. Hi, I'm Wayne Pollock. I'm a former AM Law 50 senior associate who discovered the world of content marketing and thought leadership marketing and hasn't looked back. In each episode of this podcast, I interview lawyers and legal industry in-house marketers who are doing big things with their content marketing and thought leadership marketing. This is Legally Contented. Welcome to episode number 30 of Legally Contented. I'm your host, Wayne Pollock. This is a Lowdown episode where I review highlights and tease out takeaways from our 5 most recent interview episodes. In this episode, we're reviewing episode 16 with Scott Becker, episode 19 with Colleen, Kenney, and Robert Keeling, episode 22 with Eric Pacifici, episode number 25 with David Johnson, and episode number 27 with Kirk Jenkins. We've got a lot to cover, so let's dive in with Scott Becker. Scott is a partner in the healthcare department at McGuire Woods, one of the largest law firms in the world, and he's the founder and publisher of Becker's Hospital Review and Becker's Healthcare, one of the leading healthcare media companies in the world. In his legal practice, Scott represents hospitals and health systems, healthcare companies, and surgery center chains. He previously served on the board of partners at McGuire Woods and chaired the firm's healthcare department for nearly 13 years. What's so cool about Scott, and what was the focus really of our conversation, was the way he used content marketing and thought leadership marketing to build his legal practice at McGuire Woods. But that same content formed the basis for what became Becker's Hospital Review and Becker's Healthcare. He created a separate media company on the back of creating thought leadership marketing content and business development content for his legal practice. Our conversation was fascinating because it explored entrepreneurship in a way that I don't think many lawyers consider. The content creation efforts that they put in for their legal practice in certain circumstances, like Scott's, could be its own standalone media company. Scott shows just how far you can take thought leadership and content marketing if you are both prolific and you are niched into an area that probably isn't getting as much of a focus as it deserves, and thus the demand for that content is great because it is an underserved area. In this first clip from our conversation, Scott talks about how the mixture of content and one-on-one networking is how you stay top of mind so people recognize who you are, what you do, and how you can help them.
There's an old concept in advertising that if you want somebody to hear your message, and many people that are lawyers don't get this and they don't understand it, somebody's got to hear your message. The old rule of thumb was I got to hear it 15 times so I'm going to start to recognize you and associate you with whatever you're trying to do. There's this service called Constant Contact, and unfortunately, the title says it all. For people to really start to understand you and perceive you in a certain way, you have to be branded constantly in a certain way. Whatever your brand is you're trying to sell, smart, and I'm the expert leader in this area, in white collar healthcare litigation, whatever it is, you have to today be so pervasive in it. And it's such a crowded world. It's totally doable, but it's this great mix. When people talk to me about building a legal practice, yes, we got this big media business I built. But my legal business, if I'm trying to build legal business, it's still one-on-one, a groundwork. You're talking to people and so forth and building a practice. There's no substitute for it. The building thought leadership is what I call air support, but really building a practice takes one-on-one. You still do have to touch people directly. Nobody hires me off an email. They've got to see me, meet me. They got to meet our team and so forth. So it still is a great combination of both things.
How cool is that? That's such a great way to think about this. Air support for a ground war. Content marketing, thought leadership marketing provides air support for the ground war that is one-on-one networking and connecting with people and building rapport and relationships face to face. In the second clip from our conversation, Scott talks about how content can show that a lawyer is taking their work seriously. And this opened my eyes. I had not thought of this before, but he makes a very interesting point. Obviously, content can show many things. Content can show that the lawyer creating that content is knowledgeable and wise. about the areas of law they practice. But to Scott's point, content can also show that a lawyer takes their work seriously, and clients want to know that the lawyers they hire take what they do seriously.
One of the things I tell young lawyers trying to build a practice is, when you first dabble in it, people don't know to take you seriously enough. When you stay with it long enough, it starts to do exactly what you're talking about. They start to perceive you, people that you're trying to communicate with, build a brand with, that, oh, this person is serious about their craft. And that's what you're trying to say to clients, to potential people that you're going to work with. Yes, this person, Wayne Pollock, he's serious about what he does. He takes what he does seriously. That's very, very important. There's young lawyers at our firm that have proven over time they take what they do seriously. This is the game, that people know you're serious about what you're trying to do. You're serious about your career. And people don't want to hire people that they don't think are serious about their career.
As far as takeaways from Scott's episode, I see two main takeaways here. One is the theme that ran throughout our conversation, which is building a book of business is a longer term game that you have to commit to. You've got the content side, you have the in-person side, which includes meetings with people and speaking at conferences and connecting with them at events. So you have those two halves. He also mentioned in his episode that you have to start digging 10 ditches before they start digging themselves, and how you have to get into the habit of creating content and developing your book of business before you start to see results. It is rarely an overnight success type of situation. You've got to put in the time and you got to put in the work. And to that point, Scott had mentioned in the episode that sometimes building a book of business, your marketing and BD efforts could resemble almost its own full-time job on top of your first full-time job, which is being the lawyer that you are at the law firm where you're working at. So it's important to remember that building a book of business is an ongoing process that you have to commit to in order to be good at it. The second takeaway is that there is always room for entrepreneurship in the area of law and even within the marketing and business development efforts that lawyers put forth to help build their practices. Scott started a conference. He started a newsletter as well because he couldn't get on stage at national conferences based on associations having relationships with other law firms. He found a backdoor through creating this content. He put on his own shows. He rented hotel conference rooms to put on these programs, and he slowly began to create momentum for himself, which created momentum for his book of business and eventually helped create Becker's Hospital Review. So there is room for creativity. There's room for entrepreneurship in the practice of law. You just have to be on the lookout for it and take advantage of the opportunities when they present themselves. Turning to episode 19, that was with Colleen, Kenney, and Robert Keeling. They are partners in and co-leaders of Sidley Austin's e-discovery and data analytics group. Sidley Austin is one of the top 10, maybe most profitable law firms in the world, certainly among the top in terms of prestige and size. The backstory is that I came across their monthly e-discovery update during the course of my research for a client. I thought the updates and the overall initiative were what a well-done thought leadership program looks like at a corporate law firm. So I gave them a shout out on LinkedIn and then asked them to join me on the podcast, which they graciously did. So we really talked about the behind the scenes of how they put together this e-discovery update, which is it is a collection of cases each month regarding e-discovery. So they look at cases across the country and whittle down all of the cases to a handful, and they create this email blast that also lives on the website. And it has an executive summary that quickly walks through the basics of these 4 or 5 cases each month. And then it goes into depth with the cases, almost like a classic case briefing that you would have done at law school way, way back in the day. So in this first clip, we talk about the impact of the updates and what Colleen and Robert have seen as a result of these updates being published.
The feedback from my perspective has been uniformly positive. I think the clients and others appreciate the effort and just the work involved in identifying cases that might have otherwise slipped through the cracks. Oftentimes when we start working with new clients, we will either add them or they will affirmatively request to be added to the case notes. It's just a good way to make sure that both our clients and others are aware of notable cases that are going on.
I've had people reach out to me directly and just want to discuss something on there. I get them 10 times a year, maybe. Someone will just reach out to me to talk about a particular case note, usually a phone call, sometimes email, or to say, can you please add my colleague so-and-so? We just got someone who reached out to us and asked us to add their colleague to our case notes. To me, that is telling when people are just blindly, coldly reaching out to me and saying, hey, I read this, I thought it was really good. Could you add me to your list, or do you have time to discuss the holding, or other things like that? I think in addition to everything Robert said, that's something that is affirmative, immediate feedback.
All right, so we hear that people are reaching out directly to Colleen or Robert. That's a pretty cool way to build rapport, right? You put out this content and you have people reaching out to you. As a result, they're responding to your content. It shows that content marketing isn't a one-way street. Thought leadership isn't a one-way street, that you can build relationships, literally build relationships with people because they're responding to the content you put out. In the second clip, we talk about balancing different kinds of content and how to handle deep dives into cases versus lighter, more practical pointers.
Obviously, there's certain things that we've all published that haven't been as deep and legal insight as other things. That's a good mix. I call them practical pointers. We often publish things that are short, to the point, practical pointers. You can do those a little bit more quickly. Nothing is ever rushed. We don't rush these things. You make mistakes when you rush things. And thoughtful pieces are way more valued than a quick blurb that nobody pays any attention to. It's also just more useful in every aspect. But we do some called practical pointers. Those are much more quickly done. And they have a different intended audience. They're useful. They're helpful. I like to end every one of my presentations. Robert does the same thing with, what does this mean for you? Why do you care? Sometimes I call that slide, why do you care? And those typically could be done a little bit quicker because we're not basing it on a brand new case that came out, but on years of experience. So I'd like to think we're a little bit of a mix of all things. And Robert, your law review article obviously takes even longer than the monthly case notes. So I would say that we cover the waterfront. We don't do a lot of quick blurbs out, but we do some things much more quickly than other things, and some things with a tremendous amount of research and insight.
This is not going to surprise you, but it's helpful to keep in mind that you should have a mix of content based on both new cases that are coming down the pipe, where you can report on developments to position yourself as being on top of what's happening in the law, but also to have content based on your experience, based on your wisdom, based on things you've done previously. And that's helpful because it shows prospective clients that you've been around the block, that you've seen certain things and you know how to react to certain things that might seem particularly thorny to people who haven't had that experience, people who are only seeing these things for the first time. In terms of takeaways from this episode, I've got two for you. First, building a process for content creation will help you publish it faster and more consistently than doing it willy-nilly. Colleen, Robert, and I discussed this aspect of the content creation, how when you create a system and you create a way to do things, it not only helps it move more efficiently through the process, but it also encourages you to do it more often. You have a game plan. It's a matter of just following the game plan as opposed to creating the game plan from scratch at the same time you're creating content, which creates headaches and could disincentivize people from actually beginning the process at all. Another takeaway is that it's okay to evolve as you go when it comes to content. Perfect is the enemy of the very good. Sometimes you have to just start publishing. And while it might not be 100% of what you hoped it would be, if you're 80% of the way there, if you're 85% of the way there, that's good enough. You've got to get out and start publishing and start building your name, building your thought leadership, building your authority. You can worry about dotting every I, crossing every T down the road, but you want to at least have good enough content out there so you can begin the marketing and business development efforts instead of sitting on the sidelines waiting for perfection to happen. And as we all know, perfection rarely happens. All right, moving along. Next up is episode number 22 with Eric Pacifici. Eric is an ex-Kirkland & Ellis associate who, while he was an associate there, went on Twitter in August 2021 anonymously and built a following of 15,000 followers talking about legal issues in the SMB space, the small and medium-sized business space. He developed such a following that in May 2022, 9 months after he went on Twitter for the first time, he left Kirkland & Ellis one of the most profitable, one of the most prestigious and prominent law firms in the world, to launch an SMB law firm with two fellow partners, one of whom he met on Twitter. Now, today, Eric has over 26,000 followers. Again, he's a lawyer talking about small and medium-sized business legal issues, particularly in the areas of buying and selling a business. But he's got 26,000 followers, and thanks to Twitter, he built such a following that he saw an opportunity to leave his prestigious and well-compensated job at Kirkland & Ellis. This episode dove into the mindset of how to approach social media, especially Twitter, without necessarily expecting a quick ROI or a fast path to monetization. As you'll hear in these clips and in Eric's overall episode, when you put value out into the world and you don't focus on trying to make a quick buck, you can eventually be recognized as a leader in the field, as an authority in the field. But the key thing is putting value out there, putting knowledge out there without necessarily expecting a return on investment immediately. Just like Scott Becker had said, it is a slow process. You've got to continue to do it over time. It's not just a one-time overnight success type of thing. In this first clip, Eric talks about why he decided to go on to Twitter versus LinkedIn. I asked him this question because so often you hear that LinkedIn is the best place for lawyers to be, but I think Eric has proven that for him, Twitter is a worthwhile place to be, arguably better than LinkedIn, and perhaps for other attorneys, Twitter is a better place to be than LinkedIn or Facebook or anywhere else. So here's Eric on that point.
And what you're seeing on Twitter is, I think you're right, because we're character limited, right? Like, you can write long form on LinkedIn. People are able to, and some people are better at writing quote unquote copy. I'm not even sure I know what that means, but I guess writing more succinctly. You could probably break down copy for hours here for us, but writing succinctly on Twitter. So you really get to, you're forced to. It's not a great platform for sharing pictures, frankly. I still do, and I still share silly stuff and Pizza Fridays and stuff like that with my kids, and when we go to Disney and dad stuff. But it's a better platform for seeing inside of people's heads, and I think that's such a valuable resource. And so, if you're a good lawyer, or if you're good at anything you do, whether it be operating a business or being a service provider, people will have an opportunity to see the substance behind you before they even meet you. And so a number of clients that have come to me recently, have said, I already know what you're capable of and how you think, because I've already seen it on Twitter. And I think that and I'm certain that there are people out there that have seen what I'm capable of and seen the way that I think and have said, we're not a good fit, and are not reaching out. Right. And so in comparison to running Google ads, where I say I'm a transactional lawyer, do you want to sell your business? And then we meet, and then there has to be this whole process. A lot of people that are coming to me already feel like they know me. And frankly, I already feel like I know them, depending on what they've done. So it's a really awesome platform.
So that's an interesting wrinkle, right? The value of succinct information separate from photos and videos. And I know I'm seeing a lot on LinkedIn today in terms of my feed, a lot more personal stuff, a lot more personal content masquerading as business content, a lot more photos and videos. And I could see how Twitter requires you just to get down to the meat of it, just the facts, man. You only have 280 characters in a tweet. So you got to be a little bit more precise with your language and focused on what you're trying to say. In this next clip, I asked Eric about his approach and why he thinks his approach was so successful in terms of building an audience without coming across as overly salesy.
I think the singular reason, Wayne, that I had success, if anybody in this audience is interested, is that I approached it genuinely. If you'd asked me a year ago, are you going to start a law firm? Are you going to leave Kirkland & Ellis and start a law firm based on Twitter? My answer would have been, there's 0.0% chance of that. So by approaching it with that mindset, genuinely with that mindset, people can detect that. And so they were much more receptive to the information that I was putting out, the relationship building that I was doing, and the whole presence on the platform. So I would encourage your audience, if they try to go down this route, to try to approach it with a sustaining attitude and an understanding that people are going to be pretty turned off if you try to monetize in the short term. And that's probably easier said than done. I was working at Kirk Jenkins. I had a big salary, so I was able to do that. Other people in your audience who need to feed their families may not have the same ability to sit back on a platform and put out content and not monetize for a while, but that would be the optimal approach in my opinion.
It's funny today how there are still lawyers who are concerned about talking on social media about legal issues for fear of running afoul of the rules of professional conduct or giving away their special sauce. Eric certainly isn't the only attorney out there on social media talking about legal issues, dispensing knowledge and wisdom, but he shows that you can do so in a way that doesn't run afoul of the rules of professional conduct. It doesn't create attorney-client relationships with random social media users, but yet it is a powerful tool for building your authority and bringing in potential new clients, new referral sources, and greatly expanding your book of business. And on that related point, this final clip from my conversation with Eric talks about building relationships and how building relationships on social media compared to building relationships while he was at Kirkland & Ellis.
But for me, it's not necessarily about generating business quantitatively as much as it is qualitatively. The relationships that I've been able to build through Twitter, I've done more relationship building through Twitter in 12 months than I did in almost a decade in large law firms. You're isolated in big law. You're in your office, you're working a lot. You have a limited scope of people you have the ability to build relationships with. Most of those are practicing lawyers that are doing the same thing that you are. That doesn't really help you until much later on when they go off and they're GCs and you have those relationships. So it's long-term. The limited scope of clients that you have the ability to build relationships with as a large law firm associate are folks that you're working for already and already have relationships with your existing firm. It's very challenging, I think, to be entrepreneurial in the halls of a large law firm. With Twitter, I was able to build more relationships in 12 months than I did in 8 years and 7 years, whatever it was, in large law firms, and by an order of 100.
You can hear in Eric's clip right there a little bit of harkening back to Scott Becker, and the content can help build relationships and it provides air support for the ground war, and the combination of the content creation and the face-to-face, the networking, and how the content can lead to networking relationships on social media. It's probably going to be more Zoom and more phone calls than it will be face-to-face, but still the yin and yang of the content and the relationship building and how they both work to build someone's authority and eventually their book of business. As far as takeaways from Eric's episode, again, I've got two for you. The first is that you can build a legal practice via social media without being gimmicky, without doing weird dances on TikTok. You can provide knowledge, you can provide wisdom, you can build authority, you can build rapport on social media by taking a very straight and narrow approach and being a professional attorney who talks about legal issues and engages with people on social media who have legal issues, have legal concerns, or are in the same industry as your clients are. And you have the opportunity to get referrals from them because you are showing them that you are knowledgeable about the area of law you practice. Second takeaway, be a giver without an expectation of financial windfall in the early days. And when you take that approach, you come across as authentic. You're not out to try to make a quick buck. People can feel that. They engage with you. They think you're being authentic and you are the real deal. And next thing you know, you actually are monetizing. You are maybe seeing a bit of a financial windfall, but you've gone about it the right way, which is being authentic and giving of yourself, not looking for that quick buck. All right. 3 down, 2 to go. Next up, episode number 25 with David Johnson. David is a fiduciary litigator at Winstead. in Fort Worth. Winstead is an AmLaw 150 firm. He started in appellate work, but then he saw difficulties with building a book of business after becoming a shareholder and pivoted to fiduciary litigation. In our conversation, we focus on his blog, The Fiduciary Litigator, and how it powers his marketing and business development efforts to the tune of a 7+ figure book of business. In this first clip, you hear David talking about how he repurposes his blog posts, particularly for presentations.
One of the things I do is I take all of my blog material and put it into a paper once a year. I have a fiduciary litigation update. With the blog post, it's typically 80 to 100 pages of material. Do a PowerPoint, and I select just the most interesting or important cases, and I do an hour-long presentation. I then trot that out to bar groups and specifically to my bigger clients. I'll go in and give a lunch and learn, provide them free lunches, give them my fiduciary litigation update. Then that's my 4th webinar every year in December is my fiduciary litigation update. If somebody wasn't able to see it live, they can see it that way. It's a great way to repurpose material that's already on my blog. I've already done the work. I'm just putting it together in a format that is easy to digest and understand. And at the end of it, you feel like, okay, I've heard the 10 or 15 most important fiduciary cases that came out the last year. I feel like I'm a little more up to date on the status of the law.
I always talk about repurposing thought leadership content and how with a little bit of effort, you can exponentially increase the reach of your content by repurposing it in appropriate ways. And this is a great example where he has his blog post. David has his blog posts. He's already written them. He did the work already, but he can repackage them and then go to a conference, go to a meeting, talk to a client, go to a bar association luncheon and present this information. And again, he's done the work, but now he's repurposing it and creating a whole other piece of content specifically geared toward his audience. You could imagine that over the course of a year, if he's got 50, 60, 70 cases that he's reviewed, he can take a small handful that are directly relevant to a particular industry or a particular type of client and go to those types of meetings with only those cases. So it is an effective tool, the blog, obviously, because it on its own can bring in clients, it could build David's authority, but then it provides the raw material for him to create new content that can be laser focused on other clients, other types of referral sources, and again, just keep that content marketing flywheel going. In this second clip, David talks about the role of his blog in his business development efforts and the heavy lifting that it does.
So I would say probably the blog and the materials gets me 90% of the way there. And obviously you have to have a personal connection with someone. You have to talk to them. What's your case about? Here are some issues we need to think about. And I've had a number of cases where people leave their current lawyer and want to retain me because maybe they're not doing something the way they want it done. You want to be a little careful with that. Lawyers will always tell you if someone's leaving their first lawyer, sometimes they're bad clients to have. I've certainly had that experience too, but I've also had other cases where I get them in and they're a good client and they've got a good case and the first lawyer just didn't know what they were doing. So yeah, I would say probably 90% and then 10% is actually evaluating their case and their facts and trying to give some big picture thoughts on it that kind of sell yourself.
I always say thought leadership and content marketing can grease the business development skids for lawyers. And David just proves my point when he says that he feels like his blog posts get him 90% of the way there with potential clients. This final clip from David concerns the tangible effects that his blogging has had on his marketing and business development efforts.
So having the blog is interesting. My business base has grown a lot, but it's also done side benefits that I didn't really expect. The blog and the webinars have led to, completely new corporate clients that some of them I never heard of. And some of them, I'd heard of and didn't really have many relationships. So I see them, looking at my blog, I see them attending my webinars. I reach out to them and say, hey, you want to go to lunch? And you try to have some sort of personal relationship with them. And then, eventually, they'll kind of start sending you work because they view you as the expert. And then interestingly, I've gotten a lot of individual clients who look at this material and so I'll get hired by individuals all over the state of Texas. I have a statewide practice now, whereas before I was kind of really more based in Fort Worth and Dallas. And now I've got cases all over the state because people find my blog, find my material, and say, this is a niche area. If I got a trust dispute in South Texas dealing with real estate, I need to hire this guy. And so before the blogs, before I transitioned, I probably did about $500,000 in billings, and it steadily grew and had a couple of years of around $1 million. Then I had a couple of years of around $2 million. And then this year I'm doing about 3.5 million in billings. And that's been over a 10-year period, 8-year period. And I think it's all, I can't say it's all attributable to just the blog, but the whole kind of, like you say, the kind of circular way of touch points that I'm doing have led to that. And then there's some interesting other things that have benefited me. I mean, I've had other lawyers look at my blog and refer work to me. And then I've had people hire me as an expert in the fiduciary area. And so I'm a testifying expert in cases, or consulting expert. I've had people say, look, recently I've had some lawyers say, look, we're not really fiduciary lawyers, but we don't want to commit malpractice. Can we just hire you and we'll pay you to just kind of look over our shoulder and make sure we're not making mistakes? And, depending on my time and whatnot, of course, I'm happy to do that. And then maybe lastly, I've had judges reach out to me and say, I've got this issue, you're not a lawyer on the case, and kind of confidentially, can I, I've got this issue. What are your thoughts on it? And so, of course, that's great for my ego when a judge calls me and asks me my opinion. Not that they take it, but they are curious as to what I would view a substantive issue is. And so, that's also been fun. And I don't think that probably would have happened but for, this content marketing that I do.
How's that for growth, right? 500K to 1 mil to 2 mil to about 3.5 million. That's impressive. But did you also hear some shades of that ground game and air support that Scott Becker talked about? You've got the content, which gives you a chance to build your authority at scale because many people locally, regionally, nationally can consume that content and be impressed that the creator of that content has authority and is knowledgeable and is wise. But then you combine that with the ground game, the face-to-face networking, again, to create that yin and yang for marketing and business development purposes. 2 takeaways from my conversation with David. Content can be the hub of your marketing and business development efforts, especially if you are smart with how you repurpose. Again, David has his Fiduciary Litigator blog, and that is the hub of his marketing and business development efforts. And then he has the spokes coming out of that, such as the presentations, such as the repurposing in terms of longer form content. David's built a whole marketing and business development ecosystem around his blog. Second takeaway, thought leadership marketing, content marketing really greases the skids for business development. It can really give you almost an unfair advantage when it comes to reaching out to prospective clients or referral sources. You come pre-known, pre-screened, pre-approved by your prospective clients or referral sources because they've seen your content, they know you're an authority, and they know you're qualified. You just have to get to that last 10% to prove that you are qualified to help them with their particular issue, but you're a heck of a lot closer to the finish line in that case than if you didn't create any thought leadership marketing at all. Finally, the last interview we're covering on this Lowdown episode is episode number 27 with Kirk Jenkins. Kirk is a special counsel at the massive law firm of Arnold and Porter K. Schuller, whereas David Johnson left his appellate practice to pursue his fiduciary litigation practice. Kirk Jenkins is an appellate lifer. He's been in the appellate world for decades, and he now writes 2 appellate analytics blogs, the California Supreme Court Review and the Illinois Supreme Court Review. A lot of our conversation talked about how Kirk decided to niche down into appellate analytics instead of covering appellate courts the way that many bloggers cover them, which is to report on decisions that those courts release. In this first clip, Kirk explores this point a bit more and explains the importance of niching down, particularly in your content marketing and thought leadership marketing efforts.
The answer is because that's not a niche. There are a lot of people doing that. And there are a lot of places that you can get that information, beginning with the Justias of the world. There are at least 2 or 3 other blogs that do exactly that, what you're talking about for the California Supreme Court. There is literally no one in my lane in either Illinois or California, and it's applicable across a broader swath of cases once you dive into the analytics. If I merely tell you, well, the California Supreme Court decided Smith versus Jones today, this is what the facts were, this is what the ruling was, end of blog post, that doesn't necessarily tell you much about what's coming next, as opposed to if I tell you the majority opinions are getting longer in the last 10 years and look into ways of proving why that would be so. If you bring this kind of case, this is the coalition you're looking for. This is your easiest path to 4 votes. Or even a question I get a lot from people, how long's my wait likely to be? There are all kinds of questions that you can't answer if you do the blog that you're talking about.
Whenever I interview lawyers or in-house marketers about content marketing and thought leadership marketing, I always want to hear if there's a direct line between the content they're creating and new matters coming in the door. I asked Kirk that question, and in the second clip, he gives me his answer.
Short answer is yes, absolutely. I have gotten calls from Fortune 500 companies that said, we decided we needed an appellate lawyer in your geographic area, and it doesn't take too long to figure out who the authority is. I have gotten those kinds of calls relating to the California Supreme Court, get them fairly frequently. In fact, I have gotten calls from people looking for analytics-driven experts on the California court system, really an analytics gig as opposed to an appellate lawyering gig. But all of these areas cite the content creation. I do a yearly year in review article for the magazine that goes out to the California bar about the California Supreme Court, and I've gotten calls coming off of that. So absolutely, there's a direct line. The channel of it that's easy to overlook but is equally vital, which comes in the first year or two along with the phone calls from prospective clients, is from reporters. And you have to pay attention to that because it's another way of getting your name out there. It's invaluable to have it in the middle of an article. Kirk Jenkins, who writes about the California Supreme Court, and we consulted him for his opinion about this, that, or the other. It's invaluable, but absolutely it produces work.
How great is it to be able to draw a direct line from the blog posts that you write to new matters coming in the door, to be able to tell your colleagues, to tell your superiors, look, we have this blog and look what it's doing for us in terms of building authority, but more importantly, bringing new clients into the firm and expanding our practice. In this last clip, Kirk talks about the importance of thought leadership, and quite frankly, as someone who ghostwrites thought leadership marketing and business development content for big law and boutique law firm partners, what Kirk said was music to my ears.
Thought leadership has never been as important as it is today. You have to demonstrate, I have expertise in this. If you need X, I'm the person to come to, because there are fewer generalists today than there have ever been. It's true in trial lawyering, it's true in appellate lawyering. So as far as getting people off the sidelines, you have to have the goods on your resume demonstrating your expertise. So it's absolutely a part of this business, every bit as much as literally representing clients. You will get pushback from people in your firm saying things like, it's really difficult to monetize that. Well, in fact, it's not, because it is monetized in my case, and it's monetized in a lot of cases. That's like saying, well, I don't want to make that investment because it won't start producing income for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or whatever. You still have to make the investment. And it is an essential part of this business to demonstrate what it is you do and what it is you bring to the table, because clients are more in control of the relationship. You asked at the outset about being at Skadden in the 80s. The attorney was to a considerable degree driving the bus back in those days. The relationship has flipped. Clients control the relationship in a way that they never did back in those days. And frankly, that's a good thing. But what comes with that is you have to be in a position to prove what it is you claim you do. And that's where content creation comes in.
What Kirk discussed there, it's an interesting counterpoint to what he was just saying before. In that second clip, we talked about the direct line from the blog to new matters. And here we're talking about being able to make the investment in thought leadership and understanding, as Kirk mentioned in that second clip, that you can bring in new business through thought leadership, but you have to make the investment. And it's important today to be able to make that investment and to stand out from the crowd and your competitors in terms of building your authority and showing would-be clients and would-be referral sources that you and your colleagues are the people to bring aboard to help resolve their legal and or business issues. As far as takeaways from Kirk's episode, I think I just gave you the first one, which is the importance of thought leadership, the importance of investing in thought leadership when you're at a law firm and understanding that your investment might not pay off today, tomorrow, next week. But over time, it has the potential to bring clients in the door, to increase your bottom line and expand your practice based on its ability to persuade would-be clients, would-be referral sources that your firm has the knowledge and wisdom to help with the legal and business issues that they are looking for help with. The second takeaway is the importance of niching down and thinking about how you can niche down in ways that are helpful to your target audience. By having such a specific and helpful niche, Kirk is able to separate himself from other appellate practitioners because he can provide answers and guidance that other appellate practitioners, no matter how long they've been in practice for, can't, because they don't have the data that Kirk has cultivated and has analyzed. And on that note, we'll wrap up this Lowdown episode. If you'd like to hear more about the topics that were discussed in any of these episodes or the great advice that my guests gave during their episodes, obviously check out our podcast feed so you can download those full episodes. We'd appreciate your feedback and your reviews. Please leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. We'd also appreciate suggestions for potential guests based on them doing big things with their content marketing and thought leadership marketing efforts within the legal industry. Until next time, thanks again for tuning in to Legally Contented.